Welcome to the Runway, where we cover current events in crypto, Web3, and tech. It's Monday, March 18th. Let's take off. All right, guys, first up, unnamed presale address amasses 33 million SOL in an hour. The ambiguous 24-hour presale promised a bigger allocation for early investors without disclosing any specifics on the project. It's kind of wild what people are willing to throw money at. It seems every cycle, things don't always repeat, they rhyme. But there is a lot of capital looking to allocate to different projects, and a lot of them will be failures. Some of them will be successful, right? That's how the cookie crumbles. But what I found interesting from this was that in the past, you would see a lot of this activity occurring on Ethereum. And what we've sort of seen this cycle is a lot of activity occurring on Solana. So Solana is getting a lot of interest from investors, from people participating. The fees are a lot lower, even though there are questions about the decentralization and the security of the network because the network constantly goes down. Not constantly, but a lot of the time, annually, at least there's a couple outages, which is very unprecedented for a blockchain. But there's trade-offs that have been made there, which allow transaction throughput and scalability. So if we look at this, we can see that this project, and again, another big focus of this cycle, I believe, is going to be AI and the fusion of sort of artificial intelligence and crypto. I did try to look up and see what project this was. The Twitter message was no longer open, so you couldn't see what the actual project was that they were raising for. But it looks like the wallet received 159,300 SOL, worth over 33 million within 50 minutes after the post went live on X, on-chain data shows. So there is a strong appetite for these things. People like to gamble, they like to invest, they like to allocate capital to things. I mean, this is just investor behavior, right? A lot of times they're looking for a profit, or they're looking to just throw a dart at 20 different projects, and maybe if 2 of them stick, they will more than make up for the investment in the other projects. Some of these other blockchains are getting real usage, right? Ethereum has historically been the place for smart contract activities. You're seeing ordinal activity and NFT stuff on Bitcoin. We're seeing activity on Solana for meme coins and all sorts of different, raises, capital raises. So there is a lot of activity. This isn't a sort of winner take all space. There's going to be multiple winners, I believe. There's going to be multiple networks that people find value in. They might have slightly different roles, and they might have certain optimizations in the same way that the car market isn't a winner take all market, right? There's multiple cars. People have preferences. They have personal choices they like to make about what they like. Do they care about speed? Do they want more decentralization? Do they care about privacy? Do they care about the store of value? I mean, all of these narratives, people like options, and that's part of a market. Let's take a look at our next story here. Apple's AI ambitions could include Google or OpenAI. The iPhone maker is in active talks to bring Gemini to the iPhone and has also considered using ChatGPT. Apple is reportedly in active negotiations with Google to bring Gemini generative AI technology to the iPhone. CEO Tim Cook has already confirmed that Apple is spending a tremendous amount of time and effort on artificial intelligence features and plans to release them to its customers later this year. Bloomberg's report suggests that the AI features built into Apple's products could eventually be powered by a mix of first and third-party AI models. Apple's models could power on-device generative AI, with iOS 18 releasing later this year, while cloud-based AI features like text and image generation could come via partnerships with the likes of Google. If a Google deal comes to fruition, Apple wouldn't be the first company to have tapped the search giant to provide AI features on its phones. Earlier this year, Samsung added a series of Galaxy AI branded features to its Galaxy S24 smartphones, which are powered by Google's AI technology. Google's AI also appears prominently in its own Pixel 8 devices. The potential branding or implementation of Google's AI tech into Apple's devices is yet to be decided. The iPhone maker already has a long-standing deal with Google to make a Google search the default on its devices, in an agreement that's believed to be worth $18 billion annually. But such deals have been increasingly contentious with regulators, with the U.S. Department of Justice accusing Google of using them to unfairly entrench its search engine's market position. Interesting stuff here. I think that this is going to be no different than what we see now with search, right? Where Google has this monopoly. They have these deals with all these different phone providers, including Apple, and these different AI models that are going to come to fruition and already exist, like OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, are going to be similar in the sense of different platforms are going to have different AI models as the default, the de facto model when people just start using it. And a lot of people won't mess around with those settings, and they'll just use the default setting that comes with the phone. They won't change their browser. People like myself will optimize for that. We will use different browsers, and I will use different search engines. I don't want Google's bias and propaganda in my search results. I don't want to be socially engineered by Google, and I don't want them to own and have all of my data, including every search I've ever made, so they can form their little algorithmic profile on me and then try to push me one way or another with subtle messaging, which is exactly what they do. Let's move on. Another big conference coming up here is GTC. NVIDIA's Woodstock of AI has begun. Here's what to know. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang may debut the next generation of the company's AI chip at its GPU technology conference. The company behind the most desired hardware in the world is expected to reveal the next generation of its AI chip this week at a conference that's already been dubbed the Woodstock of AI by employees and analysts alike. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang is hosting the AI chipmaker's annual GPU technology conference in San Jose, California, where he'll be joined by fellow power players in the AI industry, including Brad Lightcap, Chief Operating Officer of OpenAI, and Arthur Mensch, Chief Executive of Mistral AI. Huang is likely to announce the next generation of the company's H100 chip, the B100. It's rumored to be NVIDIA's first multi-die chip, meaning a large design partitioned into smaller pieces. If so, the chip is expected to be even more powerful than its predecessor. Microsoft and Meta are the largest customers of the H100 chip, with both tech giants spending $9 billion on the chips in 2023. Google parent Alphabet, Amazon, and Oracle were also top spenders on the chips last year. But the frenzy over NVIDIA's H100 chips has worried some companies over shortages, and competitors keen to stay ahead in the AI race have started building their own versions of the chips. Amazon has worked on two chips called Inferentia and Trainium, while Google has been working on its Tensor processing units. Despite the competition, NVIDIA has been on a hot streak, becoming the first semiconductor company to reach a $2 trillion valuation in February. The company has seen its stock fall before reporting its fourth quarter earnings, but rebounded after beating Wall Street's expectations. So looking at this article, it's a potential to see the newest generation GPU chip, which right now, the previous cycle was A100, then now we have H100, and now you could potentially see B100 being produced here or being announced in the next 24 to 48 hours here. Anti-crypto stances becoming politically unsustainable, advocate argues. A recent discussion about shifting regulations for digital assets focused on the growing political power held by crypto investors. In a roundtable discussion focused on the evolving landscape of cryptocurrency regulation, roundtable anchor Rob Nelson and Aaron Arnold, co-founder of Altcoin Daily, delved into the U.S. Treasury market, or U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's approach toward digital assets and the broader implications for the industry. The conversation highlighted a critical divide between the need for regulation and the kind of regulatory framework that would best serve the burgeoning crypto sector from its adherents' point of view. Nelson initiated the dialogue by questioning whether Yellen's advocacy for regulation aligns with a pro-crypto stance or merely seeks to impose traditional controls on a revolutionary financial system. Arnold responded by suggesting that Yellen's approach appears conservative, aiming to preserve the status quo rather than embracing the radical change that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin propose. He contrasted the traditional regulatory perspective with the crypto community's desire for clear, fair regulations that foster innovation rather than stifle it. So the key takeaway here, I think, is that we've got a new novel system, a new novel industry, and we should have regulations that make sense for that industry, right? We shouldn't try to impose in the same way that you can't apply the same laws for traffic that you use for cars. You can't apply those same laws to people flying a plane, right? You need separate and thoughtful, intelligent legislation that makes sense for that industry, that will set the rules of the road in a way, but also will attract, because when you form a clear guideline of a system, it attracts capital, it attracts talent. People know what to expect. They know that they're going to be treated fairly. They know what the rules are of the game. And of course, people like myself would like to see as minimal amount of rules as possible. But, obviously we still want to go after bad actors and threat actors, but we want to let capitalism work its way out. We want to attract talent, attract people in industry. Of course, this idea of protecting people, yes, maybe there are some protections that should be in place, but a lot of that should be more of a disclosure system as opposed to trying to micromanage and act like a parent to people when they are adults and they can make their own decisions, right? This takes me to Xpost. Macroscope. Here's an interesting one that kind of talks a little bit about Bitcoin and regulation. I thought it was worth going down the rabbit hole. We did less stories today, and we're going to do more X takes because I think there's a lot more value here on different ideas and topics and thought processes. So let's read this X take by Macroscope. I wonder how many really understand the bitter opposition by policymakers to Bitcoin and especially an ETF. Gary Gensler doesn't really hate it because of investor protection. That's only a minor reason. Elizabeth Warren doesn't actually think its criminal use is significant. Obscure members of Congress who seem to pop up out of nowhere, with Bitcoin of all things strangely on their minds, and who repeat these tiresome objections, often in laughable letters, to the SEC, are in many cases quietly pushed to do so by others, including from the Fed, who understand the real threat. In a system that depends on irresponsible government spending, especially for perpetual war, and fiat printing to cover that irresponsibility, alarm bells cannot be allowed to work. There must be no pure price signals, and above all, an alarm bell must not also serve as a life raft that's easily accessible to everyone, especially the general public, in the form of an ETF. There must be no escape hatch. This is an unstated but important motivation for the long-standing resistance to Bitcoin and especially an ETF. It's also why the 3-judge panel of a federal appeals court that in 2023 essentially forced the SEC to approve the ETFs may ultimately turn out to be the most unsung but consequential people in the history of U.S. financial markets. After that court's ruling, you could almost hear public policymakers and some influential private sector figures, names that everyone knows, and some very important ones who stay out of the news, smack their foreheads and say, "Those damn judges, don't they realize what they've done?" The system's defenders have always understood that life rafts and escape hatches can't be allowed. Here's Christine Lagarde talking about Bitcoin in 2021, ostensibly about the need for global cooperation on regulation, but the larger point was clear. If there is an escape, that escape will be used. End quote. Here's a seminal essay by Alan Greenspan in 1966, when he was still in the private sector. An almost hysterical antagonism towards the gold standard is one issue which unites statists of all persuasions. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value. If there were, the government would have to make its holding illegal, as was done in the case of gold. The financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for the owners of wealth to protect themselves. I'd say the antagonism towards Bitcoin qualifies as hysterical, wouldn't you? And in terms of protection, in a political system defined by profligacy and incompetent policy, especially monetary policy in recent years, a free trading asset that serves as protection and, via its price action, starkly highlights those two faults is resented and hated. This is why the Bitcoin ETFs in particular are so important, and why they were bitterly resisted for so long, and the SEC only approved them after being forced to do so by a court decision. Gold is usually slow-moving and can be suppressed, and even if it does rise to 2,500 or 3,000, DC and the Fed certainly won't like it, but it won't set off systemic alarms and the public mostly wouldn't notice. But if the ETFs help drive Bitcoin into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, the headlines will be screaming and the public will start asking uncomfortable questions. With the Fed desperate to cut rates and a potential second inflation wave looming, it's easy to see why, from a policymaker perspective, the timing of ETF approval could not have been worse. And now Bitcoin and the ETFs, as permanent, fast-growing, and highly visible canaries in the financial system, will be perpetual burrs under the policy saddle. A telling postscript. Decades after Alan Greenspan wrote that essay about gold, Ron Paul asked him to autograph a copy of it as Fed chairman, and he asked if Greenspan wanted to add a disclaimer to it. Greenspan replied, "I stand by every word," and signed it. Interesting essay there. It really goes into some of the deep ethos of Bitcoin and why many of us find it important and why many of us have dedicated our lives to being in this industry. Perhaps the biggest thing that sticks out to me in this article, and one of the reasons that I am happiest about Bitcoin, is this idea here. I'm going to highlight this where it says, in a system that depends on irresponsible government spending, especially for perpetual war, and fiat printing to cover that irresponsibility, alarm bells cannot be allowed to work. All right, so Bitcoin is this peaceful opt-out of the system in a way where you can protect your savings. It allows you to store your savings in an asset, in a superior form of money that can't be debased by government, incompetence, inflation, spending, all of those things. Let's go to this take here where it talks about Alan Greenspan's article that we previously referenced. And here it says, in the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value. If there were, the government would have to make its holding illegal, as was done in the case of gold. If everyone decided, for example, to convert all his bank deposits to silver or copper or any other good, and thereafter declined to accept checks as payment for goods, bank deposits would lose their purchasing power and government-created bank credit would be worthless as a claim on goods. The financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for the owners of wealth to protect themselves. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the status antagonism toward the gold standard. So we read that a lot of that previously in the previous X take, but here is it laid out in the book by Alan Greenspan, Gold and Economic Freedom, written in 1966. And since then, we have a new crypto asset called Bitcoin that is a superior form of gold as a money in a lot of different ways, right? If you look at the characteristics of money, and I know we've talked about that a lot here, we've talked about how Bitcoin is more divisible, how it's more scarce, how you can say its value. You can verify on the blockchain that, hey, this is real Bitcoin. Whereas in gold, it's very hard to assay and to verify whether it's actually real gold or visit another metal with gold flaked on top of it or painted on top of it, right? And there's no way for us to verify the auditability or audit the Fed and all of their gold holdings. Fort Knox, how can we actually see what's in there? There's no way to verify that. Here is a take by Pierre Richard. The Bitcoin network is projected to settle 17.5 trillion worth of Bitcoin this year. So here's the projection. I have a feeling it's going to be much more Bitcoin transaction volume than people would expect in 2024. If you look at a couple of the previous years, we see that since 2019 to 2024, you can see if you average out these amounts, you can see that the network is growing, more transaction volume is occurring, more settlement is occurring. Interesting to see. Fiat Hawk. Time is money. It takes time to earn money. When they print money, it now takes you even more time because you can now buy less with your money. Do you now see how fiat money printing robs you of your time and dignity? You are a modern slave. Join the resistance. Exit the fiat hamster wheel and save and free yourself with Bitcoin. It's why we've seen this income inequality greatly accelerate itself since 1971, where the wealthy are able to afford assets that can protect their purchasing power, while the poorest aren't able to save it all. They're not able to break that cycle. And sadly, one of the last things to correct when money is printed in society are wages, right? Wages are one of the last signals in the market. They're one of the last things to be changed. Where the prices of goods and services will change first, wages are sticky and will take longer to be raised. In the meantime, you have to pay more for goods, more for rent, more for housing, more for gas, more for food. And that's exactly what we've seen since the government printed trillions of dollars out of thin air during the COVID so-called crisis. My favorite thing about this, Warren alone may cost Dems the election. She may cost herself her own seat. She's going through the typical rabid crypto critic arc. All such people end up insane. Still amazed MSM hasn't picked this up. So here's an interesting take, an interesting post looking at data on who voters are going to vote for and what their thought was in 2020, what their thought is now in 2024. And now for something surprising, crypto voters leaned to Biden in 2020, but now lean Trump. Amongst crypto owners, 43% recall voting for Biden in 2020 and 39% recall voting for Trump. Now crypto owners support Trump 48-39. In a close election, this swing could be decisive. We've watched Trump's sort of evolution, where he was sort of antagonistic initially. And over the past 4 to 6 years, we've seen growth in that space. We've seen him launch NFT collections. We've seen him engage and get involved and sort of say different things. He said recently that he lets people pay in Bitcoin. It's a new currency. So he's coming around to the space. He's engaged. He's got an Ordinals NFT collection on Bitcoin. He has a Ethereum NFT collections. So he is someone who's actively learning and growing in this sense. And as a contrast, we've seen what's happened with the Biden administration and what they've done and how they've behaved with Gary Gensler and Janet Yellen and all these characters and swap cronies from behind the scenes. So you can see here that support has flipped, and it's almost at a double-digit difference in voters who own crypto and who they see as someone whose administration they see as being more friendly towards technology and innovation in the cryptocurrency and Web3 space. Not surprised in the least bit. So here's a post from Dennis Porter. This is pre-halving. This is before pension funds. This is before retail. You are not prepared for what's coming next. What Dennis is kind of saying here is that we haven't even had the supply shock of a halving yet on mining rewards that are produced daily, right? It will be another supply shock to the market. So we haven't had that yet. Then he's saying this is before pension funds, meaning that pension funds aren't passively allocating yet through ETFs, and they're not in a major way just continually adding it to their balance sheets. And this is before retail has really taken an interest. So in previous cycles, we've seen retail get involved, and they've mostly been retail driven. Retail just means the common individual, the average Joe, myself, you, whoever. This cycle, we're seeing institutional demand and purchasing of the ETFs, right? The BlackRocks, Grayscale Bitcoin, IBIT, Fidelity. We've got all these different ETF purchasers who have a Bitcoin ETF and who are driving institutional demand for Bitcoin. And we've seen that with a massive price explosion. One thing I want to add here is that this is also mostly before nation states, right? So we haven't seen, aside from maybe El Salvador and maybe one other sovereign nation or two, we haven't really seen nation states accumulating Bitcoin for the purpose of having it as a treasury reserve asset. So that, in my opinion, will probably be a 4 to 8 year thing that we're going to see. Nick Carter, I love how he calls out the media with ridiculous things that they say. Somewhere, some pundit decided that the halving would double Bitcoin electricity demand, and the energy critics just decided to repeat this. This is from no opinion. Where did this start? How does any sane person believe this? I'm mystified. There's also another factor that will push up Bitcoin's energy usage, the halving, which will reduce rewards for miners and incentivize them to use more energy to stay in a suddenly more competitive business. This was obviously written by somebody who has no clue what the fuck they're talking about because the halving just reduces the rewards and has nothing to do with the energy usage, right? And in fact, it might actually cause energy usage to go down because people are going to turn off machines that are not profitable. It doesn't all of a sudden, you don't just get more rewards all of a sudden by adding more bad machines. You have to upgrade your machinery. So instead of the older models, the iPhone 8, you're going to be using the iPhone 9s and 10s now. That's essentially what happens here, right? So it actually, what we have historically observed post-halving is that it's actually a hash rate reduction as inefficient machines get turned off. Here's another post here. Argentina's monthly inflation rate, December, was 25.5%, January 2024, 20.6%, February 2024, 13.2%. Argentina also just recorded its first budget surplus in 12 years of $589 million. Milei was inaugurated 3 months ago. This is just unbelievable, the turnaround we're seeing in Argentina, and I'm a big fan of Javier Milei and his policies and what he's doing over there. But you're watching him let the free market take care of things and stopping the abuse of money printing and wasted government spending. This is another big story that has happened over the weekend. Here, Paul Grewal.eth says, Mr. Right is not Satoshi. The court has just ruled definitively and without qualification. We are grateful that the rule of law has again prevailed. So I think we might have talked about this last week briefly, but the courts have ruled that Craig Wright is not Satoshi, and he is just a clown, which many of us who have been involved in the space have known for a long time. Previously, in a couple takes ago, we talked about nation states and pension funds and all these different things, right? El Salvador is really one of the only few nations that has been accumulating Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And here Naib Bukele says, we've decided to transfer a big chunk of our Bitcoin to a cold wallet and store that cold wallet in a physical vault within our national territory. You can call it our first Bitcoin piggy bank. It's not much, but it's honest work. So about $400 million, equivalency of 5,689 Bitcoin. Here's a take by Ryan Selkis. This Wall Street Journal article, and this is from about 4 or 5 days ago. This Wall Street Journal article drops the same day Biden, which he means Biden, releases $10 billion to Iran. This is Liz Warren's handiwork. Deflect from this administration's disastrous foreign policy failures and blame crypto. Here's Joe Burnett. If Bitcoin is a cult, it's the first cult that requires you to think for yourself. More likely, the dollar is a cult, and you're in it. Here's another event that's happening this Wednesday. So it's a Update the System Summit in Washington, D.C. Here's the information and the dates and the time where it's at, and this is from Coinbase. Here from Brian Armstrong, Mark Andreessen, and Faryar Shirzad, who is the Chief Policy Officer at Coinbase. This was an interesting take by Friedrich Hayek a long time ago, well before Bitcoin was created. I don't believe we shall ever have good money again before we take it out of the hands of government. We can't take it violently. All we can do is by some sly, roundabout way, introduce something they can't stop. Friedrich Hayek. And finally, I'm going to let you guys out with this. It's a take from Peter St. Onge. Say what you will about the Joker, but he did more to combat inflation than the Federal Reserve. Here he is burning piles of money. An insane individual. Stay safe, stay blessed, never stop learning, and keep an open mind. Thanks for listening.